The Runaway. The whistle of the train cut through the dusk like a blade, its shrill cry echoing over the endless plains. Clara Whitmore sat stiffly in her seat, gloved hands folded tight in her lap, her gaze fixed on the blurred horizon beyond the rattling window. The countryside rushed past in muted browns and grays, but she barely saw it. Her mind was elsewhere, on the letter that had summoned her here, folded neatly in the traveling case at her feet. Richard Alden's words had been precise, clipped, as though ordering new inventory rather than requesting a bride. Your arrival is expected. The arrangement shall be fulfilled. Prepare yourself for a practical union. Not once had he written of affection, not once of companionship, only duty, obedience, and expectation. Clara's heart tightened. She had answered the mail-order advertisement out of desperation, not love. Her father's debts had left her no choice, and Richard's wealth had promised stability. But now, nearing the point of no return, her chest burned with the certainty that she had consigned herself to a cage. The train hissed, slowing as it approached a lonely way station. The other passengers paid no mind, some stretching stiff limbs, others collecting luggage. But Clara's pulse leapt. Her chance had come. She stood abruptly, clutching her case, and moved toward the door with measured steps. The conductor was busy tending to a family with children. No one looked at her twice as she descended the iron steps and stepped onto the hard-packed dirt of the station. Then she walked, at first quickly, then faster, until the chill evening air filled her lungs. She did not glance back when the whistle shrieked again and the train pulled away, taking with it the life she had nearly surrendered to. Clara ran until the station lights were swallowed by distance, until her shoes were muddied and her breath ragged. Night gathered around her. Fields stretched silent, empty, save for the restless cry of a crow overhead. A storm was coming, the kind that tore across the plains with little warning. Clara stumbled over uneven ground, fear gnawing at her resolve. What if Richard sent men after her? What if she was found before she could disappear? It was then she saw the silhouette. A farmhouse, dark and lonesome, its roofline bent with age, its fences sagging. The land looked abandoned, forgotten by prosperity, yet the sight of it filled her with a desperate hope. Shelter, a place to vanish. Clara approached cautiously, heart hammering. Her knuckles rapped against the weathered door. For a moment there was only silence, then the creak of hinges. A tall figure filled the frame, lantern in hand. His face was shadowed, but his voice was hard, suspicious. "What do you want?" I need a place to rest," Clara stammered. "Just for the night. Please." The man's eyes narrowed as the lantern's glow revealed her mud-streaked dress and pale, anxious features. He was broad-shouldered, rough around the edges, with the bearing of someone who had worked land and lost faith in much else. "This isn't an inn," he said flatly. "I have nowhere else." Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. "I won't trouble you long." The man studied her for a long, measuring moment, as though weighing her against some private memory. At last, he stepped aside. "You can stay, but only till morning." Clara exhaled a shaky breath and stepped into the dim interior. The farmhouse smelled of earth, wood smoke, and something faintly bitter, like loneliness left too long. Dust lay thick across the shelves, yet the hearth glowed faintly, a sign of life barely tended. "I'm Edward Harrow," he said at last, setting the lantern on the table, "and I don't make a habit of taking in strays." "Clara," she whispered, lowering her gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Harrow." Truly, his silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire. She felt his eyes on her, wary, untrusting, as if expecting her to vanish like smoke. But he said nothing more, and for now, that was enough. Clara settled into the corner of the worn kitchen bench, her case at her side. She pressed her palms together to stop their trembling. She had fled the train, fled Richard Alden, fled the life chosen for her. Yet she could not know what awaited her here, in this forgotten farmhouse, under the gaze of a man who clearly carried his own ghosts. Still, one truth pulsed steady in her chest. For the first time in months, she was free. Shelter and secrets. The farmhouse groaned under the weight of the storm. Rain battered the roof and slid down the windows in long, streaking rivulets. Inside, Clara sat at the edge of the kitchen bench, damp skirts clinging to her legs, watching Edward Harrow move about with deliberate, wordless motions. He set the kettle on the stove, stirred the fire, then leaned against the table as though she were an unwelcome reminder of the world he had shut out. Silence pressed between them. Clara's nerves prickled under his scrutiny, though he said little. His eyes, pale as winter skies, lingered on her travel case before returning to the flames. "You ran," he said finally, his tone low but firm. Clara's breath caught. "What makes you think that?" "No one arrives at a farm like mine by accident," he replied. "And no one knocks at a stranger's door in the dead of night unless they're hiding." Her fingers twisted together. She wanted to tell him everything, yet fear sealed her lips. If he knew her truth, that she was a contracted bride fleeing a wealthy merchant, would he cast her back into the storm? "I left behind something I couldn't endure," she admitted softly. "That's all." Edward's jaw tightened. He did not press her further, but the weight of his silence was heavier than any question. The kettle whistled, and he poured water into 2 chipped cups. The simple act of sliding one toward her felt almost like a truce. Clara wrapped her hands around the warmth, grateful for the small kindness. "You don't strike me as helpless," Edward said after a long pause. "But you do strike me as reckless." Clara met his gaze, surprised at the sting in his words. "Perhaps I am, but sometimes recklessness is the only choice left." He studied her with an unreadable expression, then turned away, as though her answer unsettled him more than he wished to show. Through the night, Clara's eyes wandered the room, noting details that spoke more of Edward than his words did. The shelves held no trinkets, only tools and jars. The walls bore no portraits, only dust. The absence of softness suggested a house once shared, now stripped bare. When he caught her gaze drifting, Edward said quietly, "This place wasn't always like this." Clara hesitated, then asked, "What changed it?" His hand brushed the edge of the table. "My wife." The single word carried a heaviness that silenced the storm for a moment. He did not speak of her with fondness, but with a bitterness sharp as rusted iron. Clara leaned forward, drawn by the pain threaded in his voice. "She left. She betrayed," he corrected flatly. "Walked out the door one morning with another man. Took more than her clothes. She took the heart from this house. I buried the rest." Clara lowered her gaze, ashamed for prying. Yet the confession tugged at her. Beneath his guarded manner lived wounds as raw as her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Edward gave no reply. Instead, he rose and set another log on the fire, sparks flaring briefly before dimming. His movements were steady, yet the taut lines of his shoulders betrayed the memory's sting. The night stretched on, filled with the sounds of rain and fire. Clara, seeking to ease the silence, offered to prepare food. Edward seemed ready to refuse, then relented with a slight nod. She busied herself with bread and broth, movements clumsy in the unfamiliar kitchen, but steady with determination. When she set the meal before him, Edward's eyes softened for the first time. He ate quietly, yet the atmosphere shifted. The farmhouse, though worn, felt less barren with the rhythm of 2 lives inside it. As the storm waned, Clara's exhaustion grew. Edward offered her the small cot near the hearth. She lay there, listening to the creak of floorboards as he moved about, extinguishing lamps. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered into the dim room, "Thank you for letting me stay." Edward paused at the doorway. His profile, outlined by fading light, looked carved in stone. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Morning has a way of changing what feels safe in the night." The words lingered, neither a promise nor a warning, but something caught between the two. Clara closed her eyes, her heart restless with questions. She had fled one prison only to find herself in the house of a man who bore his own chains. Yet, beneath his hardness, she sensed the faintest glimmer of something else, something neither of them dared name: the threat of discovery. The morning broke with a pale sun veiled by thin clouds, casting the farmhouse in a muted, uncertain light. Clara rose early, her body stiff from the narrow cot, and found Edward already outside, splitting wood. His axe swung in steady arcs, each strike echoing across the empty fields. He worked with the precision of a man used to solitude, each movement deliberate, as though labor itself were a form of silence. Clara stepped onto the porch, hugging her shawl close. For a moment she only watched him, the strength in his arms, the grim set of his jaw. He noticed her at last, resting the axe against the block. "You're still here," he said, his tone neither welcoming nor cold, only observant. "You expected me to be gone?" People who run tend to keep running. His gaze lingered on her, as if weighing whether she would vanish like morning mist. Clara lowered her eyes. "Not this time." Before Edward could reply, the sound of distant hooves reached them. Both froze. The steady rhythm of horses grew louder, drawing nearer across the plain. Clara's heart lurched into her throat. "They're looking for me," she whispered. Edward's expression hardened, but he said nothing. He strode toward the barn, gesturing for her to follow. Inside, the smell of hay and old wood pressed around them. He pulled open a trapdoor beneath the loft, revealing a shallow cellar used for tools. "Get in," he ordered. Clara hesitated. "You'd risk yourself for me?" His eyes flashed with something sharp. "I don't like liars, but I like the men who hunt women even less." "Down!" She obeyed, lowering herself into the narrow space. Edward closed the trapdoor, scattering hay across it just as the riders drew up outside. Through the cracks, Clara heard the heavy knock on the farmhouse door. A gruff voice called, "Harrow, you seen a young woman pass this way? Pale, brown hair, traveling alone. Belongs to Mr. Richard Alden." Edward's voice carried steady, cool. "I've seen no one." The man snorted. She was meant to be his bride. Fool girl fled the train. "Mr. Alden wants her back, alive or not. He'll pay handsomely for her return." Clara's blood ran cold. She pressed a fist to her mouth to smother her breath. "I keep to my land," Edward replied. "Whatever foolishness happens beyond it isn't my concern." Boots thudded against the porch. Another voice muttered, "He's lying. Should we check the barn?" Clara's chest tightened. She prayed Edward would send them away. But Edward's tone sharpened, iron under his words. "Search my barn, and you'll answer to me. This land may be forgotten, but it's still mine. Step across that threshold uninvited, and you'll regret it." A tense pause followed, broken only by the restless stamping of the horses. Then the first man spat. "Come on. He's not worth it. If she passed here, she won't last long anyway." The sound of hooves retreated, fading across the plains until silence returned. Moments later, the trapdoor creaked open. Edward's face appeared above, stern but edged with relief. He extended a hand, pulling Clara out of the darkness. Her knees trembled as she stood. "They would have found me, if not for you." Edward turned away, setting his jaw. "You should have told me the truth." Clara's throat tightened. "I was afraid you'd send me back. You think hiding it made you safer?" His voice rose, sharp with anger. "I nearly got dragged into a manhunt because you couldn't speak plain." Tears burned in her eyes. "I didn't choose this arrangement with Richard. My father sold me like property. Do you know what it feels like to be bound to a man's will before you've even met him?" Edward's anger faltered, replaced by something raw. His gaze darkened, haunted by memory. "I know what betrayal feels like. It rots everything it touches." Clara stepped closer, her voice trembling but steady. "I'm not your wife, Edward. I didn't run from love. I ran from cage. Can't you see the difference?" He looked at her as though torn between belief and distrust. His hands clenched at his sides, fighting a battle within. Silence stretched, charged with unspoken words. Then, in a moment too quick for thought, Edward reached for her. His hand brushed her cheek, rough palm trembling. Clara leaned into the touch, her breath catching. The distance between them dissolved. His lips found hers in a fierce, desperate kiss, heavy with anger, longing, and something neither dared name. For an instant, the storm outside, the hunters, Richard, all vanished. There was only the fire of two souls who had known too much loss and too little choice. Edward pulled back first, breathing hard, eyes filled with conflict. "This can't be," he murmured, as though to himself. Not again. Clara's chest ached, torn between hope and dread. She had fled one prison, only to step into another kind of danger, the peril of wanting a man bound by ghosts. The moment hung unfinished, fragile as glass. And somewhere in the distance, a crow called, its cry cutting through the fragile silence like a warning. A choice between chains and freedom. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth. Clara stood at the window, watching the horizon blur into gray. Sleep had abandoned her after Edward's kiss, leaving her restless with equal measures of fear and longing. She knew the riders would return. Richard Alden was not a man to accept humiliation. Behind her, Edward moved about the kitchen with harsh precision, his every motion clipped, purposeful. He had spoken little since the kiss, as if words were dangerous weapons better left sheathed. Clara wanted to bridge the silence, yet uncertainty held her still. When a sound of hooves broke across the plain once more, her heart stopped. Edward's head lifted, his eyes narrowing. "This time it's him," Edward said. His voice carried no doubt. Moments later, Richard Alden appeared, mounted on a gleaming bay horse, flanked by two men. He dismounted with a practiced ease, his fine coat untouched by mud, his expression carved from disdain. Edward stepped onto the porch, body rigid, stance protective. Clara followed, though her hands trembled. Richard's gaze swept over her with proprietary coldness. "Clara, you've caused quite the spectacle. Running away for a lawful agreement. Shameful." Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she stood tall. "It wasn't lawful. It was purchase. You don't own me." Richard's smile was thin, venomous. "Your father's signature says otherwise. You are mine by contract, and I will have what I paid for." Edward's voice cut in, steady as steel. "She's not property, not while she stands on my land." Richard turned, eyes narrowing on him. The farmer, the recluse. "Do you truly mean to pit yourself against me, Harrow? I could buy 10 of your farms and burn them before the day is out." Edward's jaw tightened, but he did not flinch. "Gold won't change the truth. She doesn't want you." The tension coiled, sharp as a drawn blade. Richard's men shifted, hands near their weapons. Clara felt the weight of the moment press against her chest. She could not let Edward fight her battle alone. She stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. "Richard, hear me. I will not go with you. I'd rather face scandal, shame, or ruin than bind myself to your cruelty." For the first time, Richard's mask cracked. His eyes burned with fury, his lips curling into a snarl. "Ungrateful wretch. You think this farmer can protect you? He'll discard you like his wife discarded him." The words sliced deep, but Edward did not falter. He placed himself between Richard and Clara, his body a barrier. "Leave," he commanded, "or test me and see what comes of it." A tense silence followed, thick as storm air before lightning. Then Richard laughed, a sharp, mirthless sound. "Very well, keep her. But know this, Harrow, what is taken from me never prospers." He turned, mounting his horse with a flourish of contempt. His men followed, and soon the echo of hooves faded into distance. Only when silence returned did Clara release the breath she had been holding. Her knees weakened, and she sank onto the porch step. Edward remained standing, staring after Richard with eyes shadowed by something darker than triumph. "You shouldn't have done that," he said finally. Clara looked up at him. "Shouldn't have spoken for myself?" His jaw worked, struggling with words. "Shouldn't have chosen me. I'm not the man you think I am." Clara rose, moving closer, her voice steady. "I know who you are, Edward Harrow. A man betrayed, yes, but not broken. A man who still believes enough in right and wrong to shelter a stranger." She touched his arm lightly, her courage trembling but unyielding. "And a man I would rather risk everything for than live safe in chains." His eyes searched hers, haunted and searching. Slowly, as though afraid the moment might shatter, he cupped her face in his hands. "Clara, if you stay, you'll carry my burdens too." "Then let them be ours," she whispered. The distance between them closed again, not in desperation this time, but in resolve. Their lips met, sealing not a bargain but a choice. Freedom over duty, love over fear. The farmhouse stood silent witness as the storm clouds broke, thin sunlight piercing through to gild the fields. For the first time, Clara felt the forgotten farm breathe again, as though life had returned with her vow. She had fled a train bound for captivity and found not just shelter, but a man scarred yet unyielding, a place barren yet waiting to be restored. Together, they would rebuild, not because the world allowed it, but because they had chosen it. And as Edward's arms closed around her, Clara knew the truth with certainty. She had not simply escaped. She had begun.